Welcome to this program, Speak to the Nations. This is a platform where we gather key and strategic leaders from the different realms and spheres of life to openly discuss issues that are adversely affecting our world, nations, cities, communities, church, and even our families. And we want in this program to be able to shine light in darkness, and hopefully we can provide some sort of solution to the problems. We know that we're living in a time where things are getting a little bit dark and chaotic, but that's why we're having this forum or this platform so we can openly discuss some of the things that can help us move forward and be a positive light and voice into our world today. And here with me in the studio is Lyle Shelton, and he is a Senate candidate with the Australian Conservatives. It's so good to have you, Lyle, and I'm so excited to be able to interview you at this time.
Thanks, David, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Look, you have been a good friend to us and obviously to the wider body of Christ here in Australia. So many people have been blessed by your work over the years. But I want to start off by asking you the question of, you were a leader of the Australian Christian lobby, and you have been doing that for some time. Can you just tell us about why you did that and how long you were doing that for?
No, thanks, David. Look, one of the greatest privileges of my life was to work for just over 10 years with Australian Christian Lobby based in Canberra. Initially, I started there working as the 2IC or Chief of Staff to Jim Wallace, a former brigadier in the Australian Army and head of the Special Air Services, a very distinguished man who really trained and mentored me over time. And then eventually I became the Managing Director of Australian Christian Lobby for almost 5 years. So they were a tremendous total of 10 years there, and we really, as an organisation and as a team with volunteers all over the country, fought some of the big cultural battles of our day that affect Christians. And obviously the big one was the marriage issue, and we ended up playing a big role in the plebiscite of 2017.
How challenging was for you being a leader or part of the leadership team of ACL? Because I'm sure that, I know you mentioned it, that there were a lot of issues that you have to deal with, but how challenging that was?
It was very challenging. We had a lot of opposition, particularly, when you step out into the public square and speak up for whether it's human rights for the unborn, whether it's that marriage should be between a man and a woman, whether it's for various other social justice issues. We had a lot to say on the issue of, gambling reform, prostitution reform, overseas aid, compassionate treatment of refugees. There was a whole range of issues that we worked across, but the marriage one was probably the biggest that caused us to cop a lot of opposition.
Yes.
And flowing from that, the transgender issue. So once you redefine and degender marriage, they then wanted to tell children that they could be the wrong gender trapped in a boy's body or a girl's body. So those debates became very heated to the point when someone even came and firebombed our office in 2016. So it was pretty intense and pretty full on.
Wow. And I know that you're a man of faith, and your dad, is quite known and in many circles around here in Australia, particularly in the church. And before the recording, I actually was asking you about traditionally, when your father is a pastor and your kids, and you have kids and particularly sons, it's kind of like the norm that some of the sons or the daughters will follow the father's footsteps in pastoring. But for you, it's different. When did you realize that your calling is not so much in the pastoring in church per se, but in the arena where you're in right now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As you said, grew up as a pastor's son in a ministry family, and I really enjoyed that and appreciated that.
Yeah.
And I have always felt that God had a call on my life. and I thought that was going to be a call in traditional ministry.
Yeah.
But I initially went and trained as a journalist. I did a journalism degree at the University of Southern Queensland in Toowoomba, and for a number of years I worked in journalism for about 6.5 years. But I always thought that I would, find my way in time into a ministry role, and so I did actually go and work in my dad's church for about 3 years. I was the youth pastor there. And that was a terrific experience. I really, really enjoyed that time, enjoyed working under my dad and with the wider team that we had on staff at Toowoomba City Church, and of course the work that our church did in fostering unity in the body of Christ in Toowoomba. That was they were 3 wonderful years. But to your question about when did I realise that perhaps being in a traditional pastor role was not for me, I think it was during that period, because there was a Toowoomba City Council election, and I guess having been a journalist for all those years and spent a lot of time interfacing with politics as part of that, and also having a keen interest in politics.
You were seeing a lot of things that were concerning you.
Absolutely, and we could see that in the life of the city. So I thought I felt compelled to run for election for the local council.
Oh, wow.
And so I ended up leaving full-time church ministry, and I was elected to the council, and I spent 6 years as a local government councillor in Toowoomba. And so I guess I naturally sort of morphed away from a traditional church ministry into more of a political role in our city. So I guess that's when the transition sort of happened.
Began. Yeah. Well, there's a story in the Bible, and I know you're familiar with Daniel in a Babylonian system, because every time I think of you and the likes of you, I can see that it's God is raising up the modern day Daniels in a Babylonian system. Do you see a parallel between what you do and Daniel's story, or maybe another character in the Bible?
Absolutely. I mean, if I think back on those 6 years on the Toowoomba City Council, we had some pretty big fights over some key issues of principle, over whether we should allow brothels in our city. The state government was trying to force local councils to approve brothel applications where young women could be exploited by men. And I made a public stand against that. And I very much felt like a Daniel in a lion's den.
Absolutely.
There was also some changes in government policy around strip clubs. And again, some really degrading things that could be done to young women to entertain men. And the council was expected to reflect these new policies of degradation of young women in our planning system and in our planning scheme. And so I stood up against that. That was very controversial in the city. It made front page of the newspaper and the television, the radio, and caused a big stir. But again, I felt that was the right thing to do. And I think, fast forward several years in the Me Too era, I think people would actually support what I did. But back then, it was controversial because no one wanted to rock the boat.
Absolutely. So basically, you have come away from the comfort of church ministry, and you're being put in the front line, the firing lines, and this is what you're talking about, the intensity, the battles that is real outside of the four walls of the church, starting with what you're doing in Toowoomba up to where you are right now. Can you just talk a little bit about that transition from Toowoomba to where you are presently at this moment?
Yeah, I think, and again, my dad's been a big influence on me in this. He has always taught us and taught our church to see that the gospel is good news for all of society. It obviously starts with us finding the good news of Jesus personally and finding a relationship with him, and that's obviously crucial. Every knee needs to bow before Christ. That's the proposition of the gospel. But the gospel then applies out to the wider society. And where you have situations of injustice coming through, whether it's a local council wanting to, approve strip clubs or brothels or things that will cause harm to young women and to the wider society, or whether it's the parliament legislating to allow the killing of unborn babies and the coercion of women into abortion as happens legally, someone needs to stand up and say, no, this is not right. And we live in a democracy, and as Christians and as people of faith or even no faith but who are concerned about these issues, we should participate in the democracy. And I guess that's where I feel.
Because democracy allows us the freedom of speech and many other freedoms that we should have. And we, as the church and Christians, should be participating, even vocally, in some of these things that you see that is happening to our nation right now.
I mean, any reading of the Bible and any examination of what Christians have done historically in the face of societal injustice will show that Christians have participated and always had something to say. They've always spoken truth to power. Now, what I've observed in modern Christendom in the last, perhaps 100 or 200 years is we have shrunk back from that role, and particularly in recent years we've truncated the gospel and constrained what we do to the four walls of the church and haven't participated. And the democratic system was formed by people of faith.
That's it.
Who believed that power needed checks and balances.
Yes.
That's why we have an open democracy. That's why anyone can participate and get involved. And yet, for some reason, people of faith and who have values have chosen not to participate.
And pull back from getting involved and engaging deliberately in changing society and even the nation itself.
Yeah, we have every right to be part of that shaping. Now, others have been shaping our society in the last 40 or 50 years. What I would call a green left cultural Marxist view of the world, to use those sort of political labels. Those people have been quite actively shaping public policy, and we haven't been participating. Now, we have no right as Christians greater than anyone else in society. Everyone can participate. My concern is that we haven't. Our voice has been silent. Other voices have been carrying the day, and that needs to change, because I think we're seeing injustice coming through our political system as a result of that.
But like they said, we are the silent majority because there's so many conservative
I
Christians.
hope we're the majority. I don't know, I guess...
probably not at this time.
Well, look, I think if people knew the truth of some of the public policy that's been driven by this green left cultural Marxism, I think that would be a majority. I think people are very ignorant. I think people are disengaged from politics, so they don't, I think the average Australian would be aghast that abortion is legal in the state of Queensland right up to birth. Now, people just don't know because they're not following that. They don't know why Jackie Trad, our Deputy Premier, enacted a law that allows a baby to be killed even when there's a healthy mother and a healthy baby right up to the moment of birth. Now, that's a shocking thing, but that happened here last October.
So you call that late-term abortion?
That is late-term
policy that they have.
Now, she would say there's very few late-term abortions that happen. The perinatal statistics show that there are around about 200 or so late-term abortions in each state of Australia every year. And we know that babies are born alive and left to die after botched abortions. This happens, it's documented. But again, who knows that out there in the public? And you don't have to be a Christian to be concerned about these injustices. And there's many other things that we could talk about, but that's just but one quite extreme example of the ignorance that exists in our wider population.
I wanted to ask you this question because I know that you're already touching on the policies that has adverse effect on us now in Australia, because I know that whatever's happening here in Australia is a micro picture of what's happening all around the world. So being a Senate candidate for the Australian Conservative Party, can you just go through some of those policies and legislations that you see now that are actually detrimental, that if we don't do something about it now, is going to get worse in our country?
Well, thank you for asking that. Look, one of the key reasons that I'm running at this election is because I'm very concerned about the future of freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And this is very much under threat as a result of what's known as identity politics. And the most iconic identity political issue is the gay marriage issue. When that changed in 2017, that was far more than just something that affected a loving couple.
So would you say that basically it opened up a Pandora box of all other hidden issues that we're now seeing that has come out of the fact that we passed that?
Absolutely, because once you redefine the basic group unit of society, the family, and say that it's not a male-female project, suddenly that has an impact on what you're allowed to say and even think about what marriage is. So we already have in place layers and layers of anti-discrimination legislation with a very, very low threshold for triggering that legislation. So I'll give you an example. If now people like you and I want to say we think that the only true version of marriage is between one man and one woman, that can then trigger someone who might disagree. And because the law of the land no longer reflects or supports what you and I believe to be true about marriage, if someone's offended by that, they can take us off to an anti-discrimination tribunal and we can be fined as a result of that. Christian schools and even Muslim schools that believe in marriage between one man and one woman are now in danger of not being free to be able to teach that to their children. So we're not free anymore to uphold what everyone in society believed about marriage until 5 minutes ago.
Yeah. Well, because I have seen lately that there is the push now, I don't know what's happening in the other states, but here in Queensland about genderless identification. And I've also seen that there are a push now, some programs are going into the school to teach our kids that it's okay to be male if you want to be male, if you want to change your sex to a female, that it's okay. So I'm seeing now that out of the passing of the same-sex marriage, all these other issues are starting to pop up in not just in the political with all the policies that they're passing, but the social impact and implications is far and wide.
Look,
just talk about that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Not only has it affecting freedom of speech and freedom of religion, as we just mentioned, but as you rightly point out, once you degender marriage, the next phase is to degender what it means to actually be a human creature, or as human creatures, male and female. And so, the LGBT, IQ, A plus, alphabet, whatever, the T in all that stands for transgender. So the next wave that we're seeing now after same-sex marriage is the transgender movement, and they are putting things like the Safe Schools program, so-called Safe Schools program, which teaches children that gender is fluid, teaches even 4-year-olds that no one can tell you if you are a boy or a girl, only you can know. Now, that's a terrible thing to plant in the mind of a little child. And what it does is it puts children on a path towards, firstly, social transitioning. So a little boy might be put in a dress, and then they put them onto puberty blockers to try and delay the onset of puberty, then cross-sex hormones, and now we're seeing increasing numbers of minors, and particularly girls, having their breasts removed surgically so that they can live as boys or as men. Now, this, in my view, is child abuse. That we have an epidemic of children, of adolescents presenting at gender clinics right around Australia in the last 4 or 5 years since this Safe Schools program came on. It's accelerating since the passing of same-sex marriage because same-sex marriage has legitimised the whole transgender journey. Absolutely. And this is abuse of children. Look, if adults want to transition, I don't recommend that. That's one thing. But to actually indoctrinate kids at school, which is what our society is doing, and it's happened, partly under coalition governments as well, is just absolutely outrageous.
So basically, my observation is this, that we have moved away, the world have moved away from the natural, the things that are normal, the natural and the normal things. We're becoming more and more abnormal. And I mean, I'm a pastor and I read things in the Bible that scares me, which I see that is happening right now in our world today, where we're becoming more and more abnormal. And because of that, I can see that the moral boundaries are being broken, and it's almost like humans can just do anything they want to do, even though it is detrimental to our lives and society at large. What do you think of that? Because being a man of faith, because my understanding is what we believe is also on the line here, our values, our principles.
Absolutely. You are absolutely spot on. I mean, Western society, Western civilization, of which Australia is a beneficiary of, has been founded on the ideas that came from the Bible.
Absolutely.
That freedom happens within proper constraints.
Absolutely.
Freedom is not anything goes. That actually is anarchy, and that leads to chaos. Freedom is always with a fence around it, with regulations and boundaries.
But the boundaries is there to protect us.
The boundaries are to protect us. That's why we have a legal system. Now, what we've got in the last 30 or 40 years, well, particularly since the 60s, is anything goes. And no society can exist where it's just a free-for-all, whether it's morally, whether it's, you just determine whatever your gender is. It just becomes messy. And then what happens is those of us who want to say, well, I don't agree that a boy can become a girl, or a man can, just transition, in their mind and go off to the, Queensland Motor Registry and change their driver's licence or their birth certificate, which is what you can do today. So if we speak out against that, we are accused of bigotry.
Yes.
And what do you do to bigots? You arrest them. And this is starting to happen in England particularly, but also pressure is coming on people in Australia like Archbishop Julian Porteous in Tasmania and many others for resisting these trends. And so it's very serious because freedom itself is at stake.
That's it. And like you said, there's minority groups that are actually pushing their agenda and in the name of freedom. But as they gain their freedom, they are suppressing other people's freedom. Can you just talk a little bit about that reality that is happening here in Australia right now? Because I know that you hear a lot about my freedom, respect other people's freedom. And as we are screaming out about our freedom, we're actually suppressing other people at the same time. So it's not really democracy anymore.
No, that's
what
right.
What do we have right now in Australia?
Well, it's a form of totalitarianism that we're experiencing. So, and it's particularly being driven by, the what I call the rainbow political movement.
Yes.
So they've succeeded in redefining marriage, and redefining gender.
Yes.
So now they're using the arm of the law to actually force the rest of us into conforming with their worldview. Now, they lied to us in the marriage plebiscite in 2017. They said there would be no consequences. This is just about the love of two people.
That's it.
But here we are, 12 months down the track, and we're seeing all sorts of pressure coming through the legal system to force people to conform, whether it's Christian schools or Muslim schools, whether it's individuals in the way we speak, whether it's parents who want to make sure their children are protected from transgender indoctrination.
Yes.
Our freedoms have been lost as a result of this. And if we don't start to push back very soon, we're going to find... I already know people who are too scared to speak up, whether it's in their local school or in their PNC. We have to speak up in the public square politically and take action and to push back and to start to reverse this before it's too late.
Yeah, but when there is fear that is spread across a democratic nation like Australia, it's not democracy anymore because fear is now keeping a lot of us silent and quiet, and yet we have things that we can contribute to the positive change of our society. Can you talk about this fear thing that I'm not just seeing and hearing here happening in Australia, but even in America and other nations?
Yeah, this is sweeping right across, particularly the Anglosphere. So England, Canada, America, Australia. Canada is probably the worst. They're further down the track, and the UK. But we have a crisis of courage and a crisis of will. Alexander Solzhenitsyn is one of my great heroes. He spent years in a gulag in Russia because he criticised Stalin, and he wrote a very famous book called The Gulag Archipelago. And that got him into all sorts of trouble. He was exiled to America. But when he came to America, he realised that whilst communism was terrible, but the seeds of its own destruction lay within the West, because we no longer had the will or the courage to defend the values which had made the West great. And he could see materialism and the breakdown of family and morals, and he realised we were actually decaying in a different way to the way these totalitarian countries had gone. And he criticised America for that, and it wasn't received well. But I think his warnings, which go back to 1978 when he spoke at Harvard University about the lack of will and courage to defend ourselves, that's the crisis that we, particularly in the church and the wider society, face, because most Australians know this stuff is nonsense. And yet there's a lack of courage and a lack of will to defend ourselves.
Let me ask you this, but I think it may be a question relating to faith, because I know that you're a man of faith. Is there a cosmic battle happening outside of the realm of politics and the social issues that we're seeing right now? Because I believe as a pastor that there is God and there's the devil, there's good and evil. Do you believe that there are forces out there that is actually battling through all the things that we are talking about right now? Do you see that or not really?
Obviously I do. Look, I'm a Christian. I believe the Bible. I believe I believe the devil is real. I believe Jesus is real. And so somehow these spiritual forces, there is a cosmic battle. I don't pretend to understand all of that. What I do know is that we as people are able to act either for good or for evil.
That's it.
And I do believe good and evil exists. And I believe it's our job as humans and as participants in our society to act for the good and to resist evil.
That's it.
How that plays out in the spiritual realms, I don't fully understand, and I don't want to pretend.
Which you don't have to really fully understand, but at least you know that there are forces out there that are influencing.
And I don't want to be misunderstood by people. Some people say, well, that means your political opponents are of the devil and you're of God, and it's not quite as simple as that. I think there are people who act in good faith but are misguided, but I wouldn't say they are of the devil. I think you've got to be careful about that sort of language. But yeah, definitely there are forces beyond our human understanding which somehow affect the affairs of men and women.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you another question about Cardinal George Pell, and I know that he's recently on the news, on the newspaper, and it's sad to see. But I have something in my heart that I wanted to ask you about the indictment and the allegations that has been leveled against him. So my question is that an indictment against him and the Catholic Church, or is that allegations leveled against Christianity overall?
Yeah, look, it's an important question. I think the first thing that I would want to say is that what has happened in the church, and a lot in the Catholic Church, but also some of the other denominations, and also in secular institutions like the Boy Scouts and some government agencies, in terms of child sexual abuse, has been obviously horrific. And the fact that it was so prevalent in the church is obviously a disgrace on all of us who believe in Christ and believe in His church. So that's the first thing. We're all shamed because of what's happened. It doesn't mean we're all participants. Obviously,
we don't condone such practices.
And what's happened to there's been thousands and thousands of people that have been victimised and traumatised as a result of this, and there must be justice for those people. Now, in terms of Cardinal Pell, I have met him over the years. I wouldn't say I know him well. I've interacted with him at various functions. He spoke for us at a Australian Christian Lobby conference many years ago. I've read one of his books, which I found very, very helpful.
It has actually helped me too.
Look, and he's been a very brave man in the public square, combating a lot of the issues that we're talking about today. Now, he's been found guilty of some heinous crimes against children in a properly constituted court of law. Now, the great thing about our legal system is it is, by and large, it's an open process, so we can all examine the evidence as it's reported, or people can read transcripts as they've done and make judgments. I think I want to reserve judgment until the appeals process runs its course. So he's been convicted by a jury. He's appealing that guilty verdict. That's going to take some months to play out. So I think we should watch and wait. I think in the meantime, we
don't
should
rush into judgment.
Don't rush into judgment, but we should all be mindful and prayerful of victims of sexual abuse. And we should all be mindful and prayerful that truth and justice will prevail at the end, whether that's for victims or whether it's for anyone who might be wrongly accused. People can be wrongly accused in our justice system. Sometimes people who should be sent to jail are not sent to jail.
Absolutely. So, and we've seen that over the years.
It's not a perfect system, but it is a good system, and we have to respect that and let it play out. So that's probably about where I'd like to leave that.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I wanted to ask you this question about being a candidate this year. And I know the election is just around the corner. What would be your main passion or policy or agenda that you want to trumpet, or you want to herald, and a message that you want to spread all across Australia?
Look, I think our nation is in terrible trouble. It's drifting badly. I think our political class, as I said earlier, have lost the will and the courage to fight for what matters, whether that's for freedom of speech or freedom of religion. I think we are facing a potential economic crisis, again, because of a lack of will by politicians. I do think the whole climate change agenda is an alternative religion, and we're being asked to sacrifice our economy to the climate gods. And so we have an electricity system which is failing. 200,000 people lost electricity in Victoria because we've closed 10 coal-fired power stations in the last 6 years, and we haven't replaced that generating capacity. Now, I think a functioning economy is really important to the well-being of society for everyone, and you can't do that without cheap and reliable energy. So I think the economic issues, and again, a lack of...
So that would be number one on your list?
Look, it's hard.
But they're all very important.
Very important. Yeah, it's right up there with, obviously, I'm concerned about religious freedom and freedom of speech. I'm concerned about the economy, the debt levels. I think overall I'm concerned that these are issues which are politician-induced. We have these crises because politicians haven't had the courage to speak and to push back on false ideologies. They're afraid of the Greens, they're afraid of the media, they have been captured by political correctness, and that's why our political party has started to try and push back on this and to be an influence. So that's what's motivating me to run.
Okay, that is so awesome. And I actually want you to just talk about the church involvement in the political process here in Australia, particularly because it's election year. What would your message be to the church?
I think the church has got to be awakened. I think we are asleep. I think our voice has been silent when too much injustice has been occurring in a democratic system. You know, in a democracy, democracies work because of the participation of everyone. And the church is a really important constituency in a democracy. We are still a large cohort of the population, yet we've been silent when too much injustice has been done. And even the very freedom to preach the gospel now is under threat as a result of political correctness and the things that we were talking about. So I think the church has got to, it needs to wake up. You know, we don't fight our battles with guns and swords anymore. We have a parliamentary democracy, we have elections. That's the way we fight our battles and settle our differences. And I think the church has got to engage in these and participate in the democratic process and use the tools of democracy that people with alternative worldviews are using, but we're just not using it. So I think we need to get engaged. I think we've got to make sure we vote the right way, vote for people who are going to uphold our freedoms and who are going to have the courage. And look, and obviously I'm wanting to present as someone who is saying that's what I seek to do, should I be privileged enough to be elected.
It's so good. We only have about a minute or two. Is there a message from you that you want to speak forth? Because I know that there are a whole lot of people out there that are watching this program, those in the church and even those outside. If there's anything that you want to say, I'll give you the last 2-3 minutes to
Look, that's very kind, David. Look, I just believe that the election we're facing this May is the most critical election this country has faced since World War II. And I don't think that's an overstatement. I think if I look at the economic issues that we're faced with you know, the rundown of our energy system, with no proper plan to address that, with the $500 billion of debt this country is in, you know, this is putting us in a precarious position economically. I think the threats from China, particularly, and the way they're flexing their muscles militarily.
And they're strategically moving to the Pacific to take over economically and even politically.
Big challenge.
So you see that as a big threat right now.
The rise of Islam.
There you go.
And I think we have, you know, I'm not anti-Muslim people, but there's something very toxic about Islamic ideology. I think we've got to really keep that in check in this nation and globally. And then obviously the freedom of speech, freedom of religion issues, speaking up for the human rights of the unborn. I think these are all critical things that we must engage in as people. And it's no good for us any longer to be on the sidelines of these debates. What happens at this election, I think, will will shape the future of our nation for a long time to come.
wow.
And if Labor gets in, and I'm going to be a bit partisan here, David, but if Bill Shorten gets in with a Green Labor government or a Labor Green government, that will be lights out for freedom of religion. They are explicit about that. They want to fund abortions in public hospitals for the first time, and then make the funding of those hospitals contingent on whether they do abortions. So this is very serious if Labor gets in. If the Liberals are able to regain power, that will be better. But
the Conservative Party needs to get in there.
Look, and I would say that, and I will say that, because we are trying to get people elected to the Senate so that we can influence whether it's Labor or Liberal who are in power. There are too many in the Liberal Party who have also drunk the Green Left Kool-Aid. And that's why our party is needed in the Senate to be that influence. So that's my pitch.
Thank you so much. And I really believe that there's a lot of people who are watching and listening to you. I do believe that their hearts are warm towards your passion and your mission in life, particularly in the political arena. And we wish you all the best. And thank you so much for coming on the program, Lyle Shelton. I just want to say thank you again for tuning in. Please get behind Lyle Shelton and also the party, the Conservative Party, and get on their website. And we will have the website address down the bottom of the screen, and support. And I just want to say to the church, God's people out there, it's time to wake up. You have heard what Lyle have talked about, and I think it's an alarm to awaken the church for us to come out of the four walls and get involved in all the different arena of life, politically, socially, economically, because Jesus came as a light, not just to the church, but all humanity in every spheres and every realms of life. God bless you, and we'll see you on the next episode.